Well, hello, everyone. My name is Danielle. I am the founder of Tackle What's Next and a founding member of the Making Sports More Equitable Coalition. The coalition is continuing our initiatives to create conversations around equity and inclusion in the sports industry. And our next topic is around investment in minority entrepreneurship and sports funds, and how this topic plays a role in making the industry of sports as a whole more equitable. So in these conversations, we're going to be exploring inequity within sports entrepreneurship as it stands now, and how each one of us that work in sports can help one another to find opportunity and access for everyone interested in the entrepreneurship and investment space. We're going to highlight the importance of spaces that are representative in sports of the world around us, learning about the importance of providing resources, connections, collaborations to diverse peoples within our industry. And we're going to talk about exploring leveling the playing field, this idea that when it comes to sports startups and entrepreneurship, each of us can create spaces that really welcome perspectives different from our own. And so I'm really thrilled to introduce Randy Osei, the founder and CEO of Athlete Tech Group, for our first conversation. Randy, thank you so much for being here and having this important conversation with us.
I didn't know I was first, but as a former athlete, I will humbly take it. Thank you so much for having me today. Hope your day is going well today.
Yes, and same to you. And I love it. Yes, you're the first one we're recording with. We're so excited to dive into this conversation, and I know you're going to give us some nice and juicy insights on this space. So, Randy, I want to start off just with the world of entrepreneurship in general and how you got involved. So, what made you decide that you wanted to go into entrepreneurship? Like you said, athlete background. Did something spark this idea in your career as an athlete? Was it circumstantial? Like, tell us how you got to this spot where you were like, okay, I'm going to start my own thing.
Yeah, great question. I think for my journey has been a unique one. I've worn a lot of hats. I turned 32 this year. So a lot has happened, and sport was the thing that always kept me grounded. It kept me focused. It kept me disciplined. It kept me from partying and going out and so on and so forth. Um, and I've always had a job. That's two things anyone that knows me would tell you is Randy always had some kind of money and was always around sports.
Mhm.
My first job was a newspaper boy at the age of 11. I had 68 houses to deliver to 3 times a week. And I think I was in grade 7, so I wasn't even in high school yet. I also had school and my rep program. So I was a busy kid. And as I got older and, as I transitioned out of sport after breaking my foot, um, opportunities would come up. And I realized I began to look at them a little bit differently, right? Opportunities seemed like opportunities to create things that didn't exist. And
Mhm.
um, when I was my story, after playing sport, becoming a brand and business manager with a professional athlete, working with that athlete, I saw there was gaps in his world, right? He was a lottery pick that when he was drafted, and those holes in around him, and I began to see all of these holes around sports in general, drove me to launch my own business in 2015, which was Osei Management. And Osei Management was a creative marketing and branding agency that was doing what I've always tried to do with entrepreneurship, which was solve problems. And the problem we were solving at that time was helping athletes explore interests outside of sport. So helping them launch their foundation, their basketball camps, their brand partnerships. Like, brand partnerships and marketing, as much as athletes are marketable, if an athlete doesn't care about what you're paying them for, it'll show,
Mhm.
right? And that's always been my pitch. And that has driven this entrepreneurial fire in me to now look at entrepreneurship from a social lens, where I'm now looking. I like to consider myself a social entrepreneur, right? Athlete Tech Group, as much as we're working with, pro athletes to help them, figure out what comes after sport. Those athletes we work with, we also say, hey, you've also got to come and speak at our Tech Summit Black conference and give back to the next generation, because your voice is powerful. So I'm always looking to find new ways to add like byproducts. So doing one thing really good, but by doing this good, is there another opportunity here? So for me, that's what it really excites me about entrepreneurship, if you will.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned Rosé Management. When you started that company, and I'd love to hear from Athlete Tech Group too, that difference, if there was any. Did you feel like you were set up to succeed? What was the process like? Did you feel like
Oh,
there were resources around? Like, tell us a
no
little bit about the
resources.
ins and outs.
No resources whatsoever. I a financial advisor said you should probably start a business because you're dealing with so many different athletes and invoices and taxes. I
Mm,
had no idea what he was talking about. No resources, just my Apple iPhone and Google to answer any questions I may have. Now, part of being an entrepreneur is you need to be resourceful. Like you absolutely have to be resourceful or you'll die, right? And
mhm,
your business will die. Sorry. Um, and I think a lot of the skills that I had learned in sports began to show true, right? I didn't know if my business was going to be successful, but I came in every day. I worked hard. I was disciplined. I shook hands. I did all of the things that I did in sports now in a new lens till I figured it out. I'm still figuring it out to this day. And back in 2015, when we started Rose, there's no way I would tell you that in 7 years we'd be in the world of technology helping athletes invest, and like that doesn't happen. But as an entrepreneur, as we explore and we learn new problems and we see new problems and things like COVID hit and innovation happens, well, the world's a little bit different. Our business model needs to be different as well. So
mhm,
no resources, but that power, that will to figure it out has driven me to learn everything I feel I need to learn, I have needed to learn, but leaving tons of room to continue to learn and grow as a person first. Because I think that's the most important piece is how do you develop as an individual? Because things around you will continuously change.
mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned that it seems like the skills you learned in athletics really helped you and were prime reasons for some of your success in the world of entrepreneurship. You mentioned the discipline and just showing up every day, putting the work in. And so my question is kind of moving from the entrepreneurial endeavors that you're looking at to some of the companies that Athlete Tech Group is working with, that you're working with other athletes to learn more about. I want to talk about really the funding process. So we're trying to talk about equity and investment in minority entrepreneurship, in minority startups, right? Tell me a little bit about what you see as the current state of funding for up and coming entrepreneurs or startups in the sports space. Do you think that we are in a good place? Are we growing? Are we finding the right funds and companies to invest in?
That's a great question. Wow. I think funding money, we've never seen funding the way that we have over the last 2 years, right? And hitting record highs, and market sizes are expected to grow by X% per year and reach this billion by here because we're at a tipping point, I feel, right? And COVID has accelerated so many things that as much as all of this funding is happening on so many levels, at the ground level, it's still not happening,
Mm,
right? It's still not happening. Um, and as we look at what is being funded, it's things that create community, that bring people together. We look at Clubhouse, for example, a platform that came out of nowhere, right? At first, we're like, what is this? This doesn't make sense. But COVID hit and we all found a use case for it. And what you see around a platform like Clubhouse is the community that built it didn't really get a chance to be a part of the growth and equity of it.
mm,
Like, so there's still that gap. I think a lot of folks that are starting new businesses in spaces, I almost feel it's super important to do what you know as opposed to do what you think might work.
mm,
And I'll say that to the NIL space. There are a lot of marketplaces launching to do X for athletes and have never worked with athletes, or have never worked with a brand that's worked with athletes. So that problem there, to me, shows that there's tons of opportunity, but not the right people are stepping into those lanes. And a lot of that could be awareness, accessibility, resources, so on and so forth. So I still see tons of gaps in this space. And I think these large sports funds and funding groups, all of the money they raise, it's not hard to put together a mentorship program to help people build skills and build community. It's not hard to put 80 grand towards the development of 30 people over the next 6 months and hope one of them turn into an entrepreneur you can get behind you or come and work at your firm. And I think because things are jumping into Web3 and crypto and all of these different platforms, no one's thinking about developing. Everyone's just trying to make sure that they don't miss the next wave, right? In trying not to mix the next wave, we're missing out on the most important piece, is investing into entrepreneurs that have the problems, have the answers to the problems, because they, believe in that theory of proximity, right? Like me, Athlete Tech Group, I've worked with athletes. It's been in my business plan. It's been in my resume. So for me to start a business, you wouldn't question it, right? What I'm seeing now is a lot of people are doing things that are not what they're not known to do, and getting funded for it because they've done great things in another space, or they have a friend or have this relationship. So the landscape is still off, in my opinion. Money is being thrown around, but not enough in development, not enough in creating programs to create these resources, right? Like the world is all over the place. There's so much information out there that you can't go to Google because you don't know what you're going to get.
So true.
Someone can pay to show up on your Google. Think about that.
Yeah.
What are you actually looking for? Right. So all of these elements, is how I see the world right now. And my hope is, athletes understand their value, understand the power they bring to the table, and how they're able to build community, right? I've said it before, nothing brings people together like sports, maybe food, but sports brings people together like no tomorrow. And it's the athletes that have all that power. So we're seeing a new day and age where they're starting to realize it a little bit more. And we're seeing a lot more athletes do more creator-like things, which I think is the perfect segue for athletes.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on a couple of things that I want to dig into a little bit more. You touched on the fact that the money is going, there's money going places, but it seems to be going to almost like the same people that are starting new things, maybe in, like you said, new areas. So do you feel like there is clear inequity in terms of when it comes to sports entrepreneurship and investment? Like, are people saying, oh, they've never done this before, or maybe they're not a known entity or like have the pedigree that some of these other folks have, whether it's directly like these are the old white dudes in sports, right, that we're talking about, or not. Maybe it's just a company that is well known. How do you feel that inequity is laid out? Do you feel like that's very clear? Is it changing in terms of, like, we're seeing more minority folks getting funding, we're seeing them being considered a lot more than maybe 10, 15 years ago? Or are we still seeing those big gaps that you're talking about where money's kind of going to the same people, and those people are not really developing younger and more diversified employees, entrepreneurs, et cetera? Like, tell me a little bit more in depth about where that inequity is.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some, like I'd be lying if, every time I open my LinkedIn or Instagram, there isn't this new Black-led angel fund or this or this that. And it's coming, but it's still too early to really say what's what, right? It's still too early. Has there been improvements? Yeah, I guess. Is it enough? Absolutely not. But there has been some improvements. Now, when you talk about, people that are receiving funding again coming from other spaces. This goes back to the lack of knowledge, right? We have people that are close to these problems, but aren't sure on how to put together a business model around how to make money, right? So you take people that come from other spaces and do a quick Google search, collect some data, put a deck together. Oh, you've done this before. Here's a check.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the people that actually are close to the problem don't get to actually answer the problem. So
Yeah.
the inequity is definitely still there. There has been a little bit of improvements, but I would say for the most part, not that much.
Yeah. And you mentioned that development, mentorship, education, knowledge are some of the things that are needed. Do you see those as the biggest barriers in terms of equity and funding, getting opportunities, and just access to being in front of people? Or are there other barriers that you think to entry in this space that we need to talk about as well?
Oh, it's definitely education. Education's definitely number one. Like hands down, definitely number one. It's think about it. How many founders get money because they went to Stanford?
Right.
And if you're a black athlete, if you're black, your chances of getting into Stanford is predominantly tied to your athletic ability. At
Right.
times, there's the other side, but for the most part, it's tied to your athletic ability. And when you're in school, do you really have time to build those other skills? You don't as an athlete. So
Mhm.
education being the number one barrier to entry into these spaces will always be the number one barrier to entry into these spaces. Because if you don't know, if you're not aware, you're not going to know what network you need to build. You're not going to know that you're a pre-seed company. You're not going to know that you've got to do a friends and family round and how much equity to give away when you're raising from your uncle versus you're raising from a stranger. You're not
Mm.
going to know to put a convertible note in early because it's going to help you save uh equity later on. Like you're not going to know these things, and if you don't know these things, why would you think in your mind that, hey, I found a problem that I could possibly solve? I think someone could give me money. It won't connect because you
Mm.
don't know. So it
Yeah.
actually starts with education. From education, then the light bulb goes off, and you're like, all right, cool. Let me go and be resourceful. Let me go and find relationships. Let me go and find a mentor. Let me go and talk to other founders. Let me go and build. And that's what entrepreneurship is all about. It's building. Not everything turns into dollars, right? It's building relationships. It's building capacity. It's building value. And if you do it the right way and people can feel your mission and align with your mission, someone at some point should give you a check.
Hmm. I really appreciate that. I think the education piece, to your point, is so important. And it's almost the education location where you got educated, what circles you're in that your education gives you access to that matters as well, right? It's the opportunity access. It sounds like that's also a barrier. Like you said, if you go to Stanford, right, you've got this great alumni network and folks that are like, great, you went to Stanford? Cool. Here's this person, let's get you a meeting, or you're in this circle, right? So, I think another question that leads me to is how do you, if you, let's say you're not going to Stanford, you're going to a smaller school, or you're going to a school that maybe doesn't have a strong business alumni network, but you are starting something. What's your advice or and kind of how to's on building that network? Is it going on LinkedIn and just building relationships, or and then you mentioned folks that will understand your mission and understand what you're trying to do. Are there specific funds that focus on certain things that maybe are more open to up and coming or entrepreneurs that are maybe not from the core traditional entrepreneurship, funnel of Stanford and MIT and all of these other places, right?
Absolutely. I think COVID has changed the location conversation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have raised money through Zoom.
Mm.
So it really doesn't matter where you are, right? We've had this big funding growth and it's all of it's been through Zoom, what we're
Yeah.
doing. So um without having the Stanfords, the MITs, the Harvards, a lot of resources are around us, right? If you're thinking about starting a business, Talk to your neighborhood mechanic. Have a conversation with them about, how did you start this business? Well, most probably had to get a loan, put something up, and you learn through storytelling. And I think, speaking to people that already have their own businesses, you'll be able to craft something of your own and build a framework that other people can understand. Because I think that's one of the hardest parts for entrepreneurs is, it all makes sense in your head. It all makes sense in your head. Like, oh, if this person sees it, they're gonna love it. And this, it all makes sense in your head until they see it and they don't get it. And you're like, wait, why don't you understand? Right. And what I've noticed is a lot of entrepreneurs don't have frameworks of how they share information. They don't have information architectures to help you understand that people read left to right, top to down. Like, those little things, especially in the digital world, when you can't be in front of somebody, is critical, super critical. And uh, now, I mean, I know we're going back to, being outside again and being able to connect, but this digital connection has got to stay strong. This is why Web3 has done so well, right? It's giving us a new opportunity to own our data and ensure that we have transparent and safe networks. It's growing very quickly, but when things grow, risks jump in, security jump in. And I think it's the same thing with entrepreneurship, right? How are you de-risking your business? How are you adding value to your business? And are there funds to help entrepreneurs get there? They're all over the place. It's all on their front. They want you to walk in. They want to give you money so they could win later, right? That's what these funds do. Now, as an entrepreneur, to get to that door, there's a lot of steps you've got to take before you get to that door. You've got to understand your product. You got to understand your market. You've got to understand personas. You got to do user journey. You got to map. You've got to build a brand. You've got to build a brand story, a go-to-market strategy. How are you going to capture users? Understanding your customer acquisition cost. Like, it's so much, because an investor is investing not into like, they're investing into the idea, yes, but they're investing into you. And you comes out in your work, right? So how you share you through your work ultimately helps you tell that story. And I think right now we're in a day and age where everyone, a lot of people are turning into entrepreneurs. Sorry, a lot of people are, yeah, I could, start selling cookies here and da 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 da. And the crazy thing is, when you hear these stories of these successful founders, it's kind of the same thing. They found a problem, wanted to try to solve it, talk to people. They're like, huh. And as they learned, they grew. But you've got to continue to learn, which goes back to my original point, is education.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop. You've got to continue to learn, because once you get stagnant, you get overtaken by companies that are constantly learning and constantly getting feedback, right? So I think there's so much to this world. And I mean, as much as I'm helping athletes explore this world, I'm going through it myself with the athlete tech, right? Like, we're raising money for Training Ground because we know it's a product that can change a lot of people's lives. But I also need to answer those questions to investors. So
Yeah.
I'm playing like this one side entrepreneur, but also educator, helping others kind of figure it out, because I'm doing it at the same time. So when they know it comes from me, they know it's coming from a genuine place. So I think that's really important for entrepreneurs to really build a network community around you of like-minded people.
Yeah, that's such a great note. I think the community around you, the asking people around you, the advice of like going to ask your local mechanic, right? Like, so many people are entrepreneurs, but they're not like cool entrepreneurs. And I say that in a way that like they're not in Silicon Valley, they're not starting these like giant conglomerate, giant tech companies where they're going to hire 100,000 people, but your local, dentist, doctor, mechanic, car service place, like all of these places, like these are all entrepreneurial. And they've all done this at a small scale in their own local business, but they've done it and they're running it. And so it's a great piece of advice to like learn how to get started. But when you get into the funding side, you mentioned all the list of things you need to do. It's if you're going to get funding from outside investors, this is not like, oh, I asked my dad for a loan. This is like, I need to prove this works. I need to have, all those elements you listed. And so I'm wondering, as you're going through this now, what's something you wish that was different in terms of what projects get funded? Is there anything you would change in like the decision-making process of investors to kind of say, hey, they don't really get this aspect, or they don't really think about this?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your experience pitching and going into these investors. What do you kind of wish they knew when deciding what projects to fund, or what are they missing? What gaps could we fill?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of investors get caught up or stuck because they get pitched so many times, right? So it's almost a catch 22. Like on the entrepreneur side, if an investor gets to know you as a person and understand your why and understand the research, an investor knows whatever you put on paper is not going to plan. They know that. No matter what you plan, all right, in 6 months, we're going to execute this. We're going to hit this. These are our key metrics. We're going to make these milestones. We're going to hit X amount of users, and then we're going to convert and make sure our churn rate is low. We're going to go through all of that, and you're still going to miss these milestones, right? And I understand why it happens, but I don't like it. But investors don't spend enough time with the founder to understand why I'm really doing this.
Mm.
Right? Really understand how I could really do this. And it's a catch 22. I think outside of just the founder and the founder's why, also exploring the market opportunity. I know investors really, it's like a numbers game and metrics and sliding scales and so on and so forth. And it's crazy because you hear about all of these companies that none of that stuff worked for, right? So like, what is the balance for an entrepreneur? Is it, pitching to investors what they want to hear, or do you keep your story consistent? Because if your story is consistent, you're going to get multiple feedback. How do you know to keep that story consistent and what to change? Because people are going to give you different sorts of energy. Some people will jump on a call with you for an hour and not listen, but they'll be there. Some people will jump on for 10 minutes and listen to every single word you said and give you some feedback. So it's things like this where imposter syndrome come up. It's things like this where you start doubting yourself, you're questioning, because we're constantly battling ourselves and people that haven't taken the time to get to know us as entrepreneurs. And my word to any entrepreneur listening or watching this is you absolutely have to be deep rooted in who you are. Your company cannot be who you are. It's what you do. Same thing goes for sports, right? As long as you're okay as an individual in that jersey, once that jersey comes off, you'll be okay. And the same thing needs to happen in the business world. So I think, taking time to really answer, like, do I want to do this? Because, I'm going to tell you, you're going to hear no way more times than you're going to hear yes. Right? Entrepreneurship is 99% idea, 1% execution. And the 1% that execute and make it happen are because they've built patterns and frameworks and they're disciplined and, there's so much structure involved, but they leave room for innovation, which is super important as well. So to answer your question, hopefully I did, but it's tough because I know an investor is probably seeing 20 companies in a day. If you're a founder, you might meet 2 companies a week. How do you become memorable in your time with that person to make someone say, let's talk again, or send me a note and let's find time? Like, it's tough.
Do you think, and I'm going to be pretty blunt in this question, do you think that your race, your ethnicity is a barrier to you in sports entrepreneurship, just in general, in your experience, and for others that may be Black or brown founders going into the
100%.
game?
100%. I mean, when I became business and brand manager for number one pick in 2013, I was considered just the homeboy.
Mm,
right? I was, oh yeah, yeah, you're his guy. You're his
yeah.
guy. And I had to wear that when I got in, but then I started to execute. Then I started to understand what a deck was. Like, yo, I can't tell you my deck story of understanding what it is and when to use it. And like that in itself should be a class,
Yeah.
right? And once I started understanding the space that I was in, then I started to really notice the almost racism in the space
Mm,
where people didn't believe that I could put together a 6-month marketing campaign, but I did it for the city of Toronto, right? I've did it for the city of Brampton. Government has hired me
mm-hmm.
and I know I can do it. There's the question of, oh, how does he do it, right? We don't see many people like him. So someone's probably helping him or he's probably got,
Mm,
that's not the case. I come in, I work, I sit down, I understand, I build a plan, and I go out and try to execute. And if I miss, I now know what doesn't work. So I'll go back and try again. So honestly, it's entrepreneurship to me is sports.
mm,
It's getting up, going to the gym at 6 a.m. And no matter if you're black, white, brown, blue, orange, or green, anyone can get up and go to the gym at 6 a.m. Anyone can do it. And we've done it, but it doesn't guarantee you anything. Right. So I've definitely felt the racism, the discrimination, the lack of confidence in my abilities and lack of knowledge. I also don't have a college degree. So all of those check boxes around me, I see why they come up. But when I, send you my deck and you read and you're like, oh, don't question at that point because I've already have dealt with this. And
mm.
this is why I'm trying to help others not deal with it because it can be demoralizing, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm here to do a basketball camp for said client. Do you want to sponsor? Oh, is this your friend? Yeah, yeah, we'll give you some Gatorade. What? No,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
presented you something. Take it serious. So um it's been a tough journey. I'm not gonna sit here and ride that coattail, but being a black Canadian in North America, talking to my parents who are immigrants to Canada, who also don't have degrees, but have been able to buy themselves homes and cars, and they also have their business. I was born here, so I should be able to navigate what's happening um, a lot better than they did. So, as much as it does happen, I'm at a point now where it doesn't like bother me as much.
Mm,
I'm more so just trying to help those get ahead of it before it starts to bother them because it can deteriorate your vision, your dream around pursuing your entrepreneurial goals. So keep
yeah.
fighting the good fight to everybody, man. It's if you want it bad enough, something will happen. I'm not gonna guarantee you're gonna make 100 million, but something will happen.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being upfront and transparent about it because from what we're trying to dive into is how do we make it more equitable? How do we change some of those negative experiences you've had simply because you're a black founder, a black business person coming in? And what are you telling those athletes you're working with that also have, the color of their skin as a barrier sometimes to getting where they want to go? How are you supporting them, and what are you telling them in terms of continuing to move? How are you trying to change maybe the industry itself to be more accepting of the fact that, hey, yeah, this, we're here, we know what we're doing, and the traditional, sports investors, like, that's just a myth. We've just kind of consistently given them opportunities, but everybody is entrepreneurial in this industry. I feel like we have a ton, we just don't see them. So how are you working to fix that? Is it through the work you're doing at Athlete Tech Group, getting more athletes excited about entrepreneurship? Or give us a quick snapshot as we wrap up of what you're doing to make change in this space.
Oh man, I'm collaborating with people like Danielle.
You're
I think I
you're too
think
nice.
no, it's the truth, right? Like people could really look at your company and look at my company and say we're competitors. They
Yeah.
could, right?
Hmm.
Athlete Tech Group when we started was a media company. We ran series like this and campaigns and hosted events. I see a world where Training Ground answers all of those questions. It's the one-stop shop. It's on-demand learning, centralized, mobile friendly. It's your tool. It's your friend. It's your platform to engage and grow your skill set on your own time, to help you really build your own autonomy. And how we've been doing it is, like I said, working with people like you, putting content out there, reading, building networks, building community, building relationships, launching little programs, testing it out like Players Club, getting people in our community to give us feedback. I think the biggest thing for entrepreneurs is feedback, and not to be scared of feedback, right? Good or bad, take it, receive it. It's the same thing a coach would tell you, good or bad, they're going to tell you. And use the feedback to be better. And if you find ways to be better than you were yesterday, everything should be okay. Should be okay. And I think, by building community, people will continuously find ways to support. And I'm a very, very big believer in it. So, you know, you reached out and said, Randy, I'm launching this series, sign me up, I'm in. Why? Because I understand that you've built a community, and this gives me a platform to engage with your community. Some people may have never met me before. This might be their first time hearing me talk. And hopefully I said something during this conversation to make you want to click something and ask a question, and maybe go check out my LinkedIn, right? It's the access to information, it's the access to education that we need to make more normal and make more available. So I encourage you to keep going. I applaud you for what you're doing with this. Maybe one day we'll be able to become a sponsor of campaigns like this, because I believe in storytelling, right? Without storytelling, I wouldn't be here. If I don't get the chance to experience what I experience and find ways to share with the world, I wouldn't be here. So continue to share those stories, and run campaigns like this, because the world needs it. And as athletes in the sports community, we also need it as well, because it's in us. We just need help finding it.
Yeah. Wow. So well said, Randy. And I think you're 100% correct. One, collaboration is, you're going to go so much further than competing. And I respect so much what you're building with Training Ground and the Players Club. And I think it takes many people to really put these things together and build that community. So, again, really appreciate you taking the time to answer some questions around your experience, where you see where we're going now, and kind of what you're doing to make things better. And I agree, education is so important, and that's the difference maker. If we can kind of democratize it and get it to everybody and give everyone, like you said, the right information, not just access to Google, right? But here's where you go to get real information on this process that you want to learn about. It could really make a big impact, and storytelling, for sure, such a big part of it. So thank you for sharing your story with us, and for taking time to share around the sports world of investment and where we're at. Really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm always down to collaborate, network. I'm big into the mentorship space and program space, because it's lasting impact, right? I'll say my time with professional athletes, working with them to launch these foundations and sports camps, the twinkle in some of these kids' eyes when the athlete walks into the gym, I'll never forget. Of the awe moment for a lot of these kids, that I've seen it so much happen with athletes, that I want to find ways to continuously create that moment, because that's a moment where you could see that they feel something, and that's a chance to change someone's trajectory in their life. So thank you so much for having me. And I really hope that this was felt, heard, and received by those that engage with it.
Well, thank you again, Randy. We appreciate your time, and we certainly know folks will be reaching out about some of the great things you shared in here. So We will catch everybody back at the next conversation. But Randy, you kicked us off very well. Conversation number one, we're on our way in this topic. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.